This is a Fox News alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. The man who jumped a fence at the White House and got into the executive mansion with a knife got a lot further inside than we have been led to believe. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry is live tonight with breaking news. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. That's right. Some more revelations tonight that are going to further embarrass the Secret Service. A source familiar with the investigation tells me you saw right there the suspect who ran over the gate and then ran through the front door, which was unlocked 2 Fridays ago. He got inside much further. There was a lot of wrestling and struggling, I'm told, inside to tackle this suspect, Omar Gonzalez. Look at this map from the White House website. He goes in through the front door, gets into the East Room where the president has events, has news conferences, and then is about to get into the Green Room where we're told he was stopped. Now, the Washington Post first reported that he got in much further and was about to enter the Green Room, those formal rooms. The Washington Post also reporting, as you see, that gunshot, that's from 2011, reporting that the incident in 2011 where shots were fired at the White House, the Secret Service was not fully forthcoming about that incident, according to the Washington Post, and the president and First Lady in private were livid about the Secret Service not giving them all the details. These two stories now converging just hours before Julia Pearson, the current Secret Service director, is going to face a real grilling tomorrow before a House hearing about all of these security incidents, why the Secret Service has appeared to fumble some of them, and what they're doing to fix this and make sure the president and First Lady are safe, Brett.
Well, that'll be an interesting hearing on Capitol Hill, and we'll have it. Meantime, the White House is dealing with the fallout from the president's 60 Minutes interview and all this talk about intelligence.
No doubt about it. The White House today facing a backlash from the president's comments where he didn't appear to be taking any personal responsibility for not seeing the threat from ISIS much sooner. Today, the White House clearly trying to backpedal from what the president said on 60 Minutes. One day after President Obama appeared to be throwing James Clapper and the rest of the intelligence community under the bus, White House aides tried to slam on the brakes and spread the blame to everyone, insisting it was not the intent of the president to pin it on the Director of National Intelligence.
Everybody was surprised to see the rapid advance that ISIL was able to make across from Syria across the Iraqi border and to be able to take over such large swaths of territory in Iraq.
Except the president himself never did tell CBS's 60 Minutes that everybody was to blame and did not take personal responsibility.
How did they end up where they are in control of so much territory? Was that a complete surprise to you?
Well, I think our head of the intelligence community, Jim Clapper, has acknowledged that I think they underestimated what had been taking place in Syria.
Republicans charged he was passing the buck.
The dog ate my homework speech. He's blaming now the intelligence community, and by the way, there's already enormous blowback from the intelligence community.
The Daily Beast quoted a former top Pentagon official taking direct aim at the White House, declaring, quote, either the president doesn't read the intelligence he's getting or he's BSing. While Clapper did tell the Washington Post this month he underestimated the will of the ISIS fighters in Iraq and overestimated the ability of Iraq's military to push back, back in February, Clapper and other intelligence officials were sounding alarm bells in Senate testimony, with Clapper at one point talking about apocalyptic disaster brewing in Syria because of the humanitarian crisis and warning there were up to 1,500 groups of insurgents taking advantage of the vacuum.
3 of the most effective are the al-Nusra Front, Ahrar al-Sham, and the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, or ISIL as it's known.
Even though the president was asked if he was surprised, White House officials tried to deny his shifting the answer to Clapper was assigning blame.
Why did he use the word they? They underestimated. Why didn't he say we? Isn't Jim Clapper part of the president's team?
Of course he is. The president has confidence in Director Clapper.
So if everybody in the U.S. government was surprised at that, nobody failed? Nobody's going to be held accountable?
Well, Ed, predicting the will of foreign security forces to fight for their country is difficult.
Now, Speaker John Boehner, meanwhile, told ABC yesterday he doesn't think the president's strategy against ISIS will work without potentially U.S. ground troops, and said he'd be willing to bring Congress back to debate and vote on that, though there are no signs Congress is going to do that, Brett.
No signs at all. Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. Well, it seems you can't keep track of all the players in the terrorism game without a program. Tonight, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge breaks down the roster for us.
Members of Osama bin Laden's inner circle have relocated to Syria under the name Khorasan.
this is just al-Qaeda. The guys who lead the Khorasan group, as they describe it, are all senior al-Qaeda leaders who have pedigrees that go back years, if not decades.
Tom Joslin, who's testified before Congress, says bin Laden's successor, Ayman al-Zawahiri, ordered seasoned operatives with long-standing ties to al-Qaeda senior leadership, also known as core al-Qaeda, to Syria. They include Muhsin al-Fadli, who is responsible for plotting attacks against the West and may have been killed in last week's airstrikes, and Saudi national Sanafi al-Nasser, who is bin Laden's third cousin, as well as a strategist and money man for the network.
One of the biggest mistakes that's been made in our analysis of al-Qaeda is this idea that core al-Qaeda is confined to South Asia. That's Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then everything that's going on elsewhere really isn't al-Qaeda. Well, al-Qaeda is not really structured that way. Al-Qaeda's had core operatives in several countries for years, including Syria.
But today the State Department denied there's a connection.
They're affiliated with, so I wouldn't characterize it that way.
To justify the president's consistent claim that al-Qaeda's on the run, the White House spokesman has narrowly defined the senior leadership.
The threat that has been decimated is the threat that was posed by core al-Qaeda. This is a network that was based along the Afghan-Pakistan border.
But even Ernest acknowledged that members of core al-Qaeda are not dead or decimated. They have simply relocated to a new battlefield.
They had to flee to another country to try to find another safe haven, to try to get into a position where they could carry out attacks against the West.
And U.S.-led airstrikes, according to a British report, are bringing former enemies together. The Guardian newspaper says ISIS and the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, the Nusra Front, of which Khorasan is part, are holding war-planning meetings to put their differences aside. U.S. intelligence officials say ISIS and the Nusra Front are battling to lead the global jihadist movement.
Military intelligence official tells Fox News that the administration had options on the table to target senior leadership of the Khorasan group and ISIS in the 18 months leading up to the recent strikes in Syria, but every option was denied, Brett.
Catherine, thank you. The man who police say beheaded a fellow worker at a processing plant in Oklahoma was not charged today with murder or anything else. Correspondent Garrett Tenney is in Moore, Oklahoma tonight with the latest chapter of this bizarre saga. Hello, Garrett.
Hey, Brett, these are problematic pieces as police continue to look into Alton Nolan's past. This is an ex-con, a recent convert to Islam, now accused of decapitating his co-worker at the Vaughn food processing plant in Moore, Oklahoma, after losing his job. Nolan posted photos of Osama bin Laden, radical Islamic fighters, and a beheading on his Facebook page. He has not been formally charged, but police are treating it as a case of workplace violence. The FBI is investigating, but Nolan's mother says this is not the son she raised as a Christian.
My son was raised up believing in God. That's what he believed.
Then a second case involving a beheading threat just miles away in Oklahoma City. Officers arrested Jacob Murithi, a fired nursing home employee, after a co-worker reported he threatened to cut her head off. Murithi reportedly told the co-worker he was Muslim, affiliated with the extremist group ISIS, and that they, quote, killed Christians by cutting off their heads. Murithi is charged with an act of terrorism. Those at a local mosque insisted the Moore beheading is not what Islam is about.
We don't have any association with these kind of people. Like there's some random guy who's just doing this crazy stuff, and they're blaming Islam for that. So that's not true.
Nolan was shot while allegedly attempting to tab a second co-worker. He still remains in the hospital. Meanwhile, the Cleveland District Attorney's Office, is looking to announce charges, the recommended charges of first-degree murder and assault with a deadly weapon tomorrow afternoon. Brett?
Garrett Tenney live in Moore, Oklahoma. Garrett, thank you. Let's talk more now about how the president is handling this new war on terror. Senior political analyst Brit Hume is here with some thoughts. Good evening, Brit.
Hello, Brett. An American Muslim convert with a Facebook page that could have been written by Osama bin Laden himself chops off the head of a former co-worker. Workplace violence, says the FBI. American warplanes bomb a previously little-known terror group called Khorasan. The raid is carried out under the president's legal authority to attack on his own when there is an imminent threat. And who is this suddenly imminently threatening Khorasan? It turns out to be an al-Qaeda cell populated by people who belong to what the administration likes to call core al-Qaeda. You remember core al-Qaeda. That's the group Mr. Obama has claimed was decimated. The president says America underestimated the threat from ISIS, formerly known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And who did the underestimating? Why, it was National Intelligence Director Jim Clapper and his colleagues. Mr. Obama told 60 Minutes Clapper has acknowledged as much. Today, though, Obama spokesman Josh Earnest, as you heard, says the president was not trying to blame Clapper. How did we ever get that idea? What is happening here is simple. President Obama badly misjudged the strength and resilience of America's terrorist enemies and adopted a foreign and military policy that has allowed them to regroup and resurge. Now we can see the chickens coming home to roost. The administration would like us to think we're seeing something else. Brett?
What do you make of this, intelligence failure that the president talks about on 60 Minutes?
Well, let's assume that there was a monstrous intelligence failure and all the intelligence agencies failed, although they didn't, to warn the president about ISIS. By February of this year, ISIS had captured Ramadi and Fallujah.
Two big cities
in Iraq that have been formerly the focus of our activities in the past, Fallujah especially. So you'd think it might have dawned on someone in the White House, especially the president, that, gee, this little terrorist group is turning out to be much more of an army than we've ever seen before, doing things that usually only armies can do, that is capturing and occupying territory. Maybe we ought to worry about them.
All right, Brett, thank you. More on this with the panel. Outgoing Attorney General Eric Holder wants to put an end to profiling by federal law enforcement. A Justice Department official tells Fox News Holder is expected to impose new curbs on the practice that will prohibit consideration of factors besides race, such as ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation. For the first time, there will be no exception for national security investigations. Up next, the first candidate debate on one of the Pick 6 races we're following that could decide who runs the Senate next year. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 10 in Phoenix with jury selection in the penalty phase retrial of convicted murderer Jodi Arias. Prosecutors will again seek the death penalty, a previous jury deadlocked. Arias acknowledged killing her boyfriend but claimed self-defense. Fox 2 in St. Louis with protester arrest outside the Ferguson Police Department. It's part of the continued reaction to last month's police shooting of an unarmed African-American man. Also reports there that bureaucrats in Ferguson are charging exorbitant fees to journalists and civil rights groups requesting government files about that case. And this is a live look at a cloudy Atlanta, very cloudy, from Fox 5 there. The big story there tonight, opening statements in the trial of a dozen former Atlanta public school officials accused of participating in a test cheating conspiracy. 35 educators and administrators were indicted. 21 of them have agreed to plea deals. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.